Hello there. Okay, we turn now to the great philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant lived from 1739 to 1805, and Kant belongs to that great school of thought called German idealism. As you know, Plato founded this school of thought called idealism, and there were other idealists throughout history. They're very different from one another. Kant is an idealist, but very different from Plato. He still belongs to that school called idealism because for him, the idea is the ultimate reality and the foundation of everything. So, in my opinion, the philosophy of Kant contains the most fully developed Christian moral philosophy that we have in our Western tradition. Kant wrote a series of great works on moral philosophy and ethics. He uses these terms interchangeably, ethics and moral philosophy. So the first real study publication came in 1785, and that's the one I selected for you to read. It's called Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, and it was published in 1785. But his major work, which surpasses our purposes in this course, is called The Critique of Practical Reason. Kant's philosophy is punctuated by three great books called the First Critique, the Second Critique, and the Third Critique. The First Critique is called the Critique of Pure Reason, Second Critique, Critique of Practical Reason, and then the Third Critique is a critique of judgment. The first critique is his metaphysics, second critique contains his moral philosophy, and the third critique contains his philosophy of art and beauty, his aesthetics, and his teleological studies of nature. But he also wrote a book called Religion Within the Bounds of Pure Reason Alone, which is a monumental work. Basically, he's taking all the stories of the New Testament and extracting from those stories the moral lessons from them. For him, the Bible is all about morality. There's a book called The Metaphysics of Morals, which was published in 1797. There's a smaller work called Toward Perpetual Peace, published in 1795. And there's a series of shorter essays on ethics that we have. Probably the most famous is On the Supposed Right to Lie for the Sake of the Love of Humanity, was published in 1797. So these works are considerable. But for our purposes, the best place to go is Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. And we're going to look at the preface, chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 3 becomes very abstract, and I'm trying to cut your reading as wherever I can to make it palatable for you. So I'm going to give 3 short lectures. This one will be the shortest one, and one will be on the preface to the Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, and then I'll give one on chapter 1 and on chapter 2. So I'd like you to read the preface, chapter 1 and chapter 2. So Kant is a very systematic thinker. Most German philosophers are. There are exceptions. Nietzsche, the next philosopher we're going to study, is not as systematic as the other Germans. But he's very systematic, and everything fits together in an architectonic in a very strict structure. So he numbers each section. So the preface has 6 sections. I'm just going to speak on these 6 sections right now. And then from section 7 to 17, each section is maybe a page and a half long. Some are even shorter. And then from 18 to 42, that's chapter 2. And then just for the sake of the completing of the work, from 43 to 48 is the third chapter, but I'm skipping that for our purposes. So I thought the way I'd approach this would be to say in my own words, uh, as simply as I can, in the briefest way possible, the gist, the crux of each section, so that as you do the readings, you could go back and forth. I mean, since this is recorded, you could always go back and forth, but you could take notes if you like. And I'm going to just say the key idea of each section so that when you're reading, if you lose his train of thought, you could go back and say, well, this is what he's talking about. Let me see if I can understand in his way of speaking the main points. So let's go through each of the sections of the preface, and I'll say what I think is the main point of each section. So he starts off talking about ethics is a discipline of philosophy, and I know there's ethics is being taught in education departments. It's being taught in counseling departments. It's taught everywhere, and I always feel a little. Well, I don't want to go into a whole um, polemics, about who it belongs to, but ethics has always been a part of philosophy. Um, it starts with Plato in the West, and it has this long history, and it's a discipline of philosophy. Now, there's medical ethics, there's you know uh, the ethics of business ethics, there's applied ethics in so many other disciplines, education and counseling and so on. But he claims that ethics belongs to philosophy, and I agree with him on that. Okay, so he goes back to the ancient Greeks, and he claims, and he simplifies things quite a bit, but that basically the ancient Greeks were concerned about three things: physics, and there was no separation between physics and metaphysics in ancient times, um, at least with Plato and the pre-Socratics. When you come to Aristotle, he does make a distinction between physics and metaphysics, but we don't have to worry about that. Kant claims there's physics, there's ethics, and there's logic among the ancient Greeks. And he claims that disciplines are either material or they're formal. By material, he means they have content other than just logical form. By formal, he means that it's concerned with structure only, and there are no concrete material concepts. So physics, he claims, is material, and it studies the laws of nature. I mean, that makes sense. And then if we were to add to that, and now I'm saying things that he didn't say in this section, but metaphysics is studying the origin and nature of nature, but physics studies the laws of nature. Okay, ethics, though, now this is an important point, it studies the laws of freedom. And by freedom, he means free choice. Remember, I made a big deal about free choice in my uh, course description of this, that ethics has to do with choice. And our trajectory through life is pretty much based on our choices, the important choices that we make. So choice means that humans are free. For Kant, part of us is made of nature, like our bodies, our inclinations, our desires, and so on. These are all connected with nature. But there's another part of us that's connected with freedom. See, nature has to follow laws. If I drop my pencil, it falls because of the law of gravity. But humans can choose. We can succumb to our inclinations, or we can choose to do what we think we ought to do, what is right. So freedom is the presupposition of ethics. If somebody is purely a determinist, if they believe everything is determined and there's no freedom, then there can be no ethics because there's no free choice. Only free choice is reprehensible or praiseworthy. So ethics studies the laws of freedom, and then logic studies the laws of thinking. In fact, the very definition of logic is the study of the principles and methods used to distinguish correct from incorrect reasoning. It's the structure of reasoning. It's not concerned with content, not directly concerned. The content is only there in order to study the form of reasoning. So we have ethics, physics, ethics, and logic. The first one is material. The second two are purely formal. Okay. Now, this distinction between the material and the formal is going to be an important one for Kant. He thinks it's legitimate to approach things in an empirical way, but that empirical approach has to be founded on a purely formal approach. So what does he mean by that? Well, Kant was producing his works. There was another movement besides continental rationalism, and German idealism is part of that tradition of rationalism where reason is supreme. There was another movement called empiricism, where they claim everything is based on experience. So these were the two main movements in modern thought. Empiricism, the great thinkers John Locke, Berkeley, and Hume are the three great ones. And then rationalism, Descartes, Leibniz, and Spinoza. Then after that came this movement called German idealism, Fichte, Schelling, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel. So Kant, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel sort of grew out of these two traditions and trying to synthesize the empirical and the rational approach. But for Kant, the rational approach has to be the foundation, and we'll see why as we proceed. So he claims that on the basis of this distinction between the empirical and the rational, but before we go on, I hope you're clear on this. These words are obvious to me because I've been doing this for so long, but if you're new to philosophy, these words may not evoke any connection in your mind. So by empirical, he means it's based on experience. Okay, and by rational, he means it's not based on experience, but it's based on the mind thinking itself, pure concepts where the mind is thinking itself. It's not thinking about content. Like if I say if P then Q, P, therefore Q, there's no content to that. If I say if it is raining, I will get wet. It is raining, so I'll probably get wet. I mean, now I've given content to that form. But if I say if P then Q, P, therefore Q, that's purely formal. So Kant thinks that formal is a priori, A then space P-R-O-R-I, a priori. A priori means prior to experience. It's the foundations upon which experience is based. So for example, if I see the world as spatially structured, Kant thought, that doesn't mean that space is in the world. It means that space is a concept of my mind. So when I'm being bombarded by sense data, I synthesize this data, these stimuli in a spatial way, and then I experience the world as spatially shaped. Or time is the same way. Time is a concept of my mind. So when I experience things temporally, that doesn't mean time is something out there. It just means my mind is structured on the basis of this a priori concept called time. And so when I experience the world, I have a temporal experience. There's a before and after, a past, a present, and a future, and so on. So Kant thought that the empirical method has to be based on the rational method, that the a posteriori, that is, that which is based on experience, has to be based on a priori, that which comes before experience. By before, he doesn't mean before in time, he means before ontologically, before in terms of being. So there's the empirical and the rational part of ethics. He goes on to say that logic is purely formal, like I was telling you about if P then Q, and so on. And that natural philosophy and ethics have an empirical part and they have a formal part. He also uses the purely formal with pure. By pure, he means unmixed with any content, with anything material. Okay? So natural philosophy, he says, formulates nature's laws as they're an object of experience. Moral philosophy formulates the laws of the human will. It formulates the laws of freedom. Insofar as that will is affected by nature and affected by circumstances. So we're going to concentrate on the human will and on the laws of freedom. Laws of nature, you see, in this preface, he's making a big deal about the difference between the empirical method and the purely formal method, because his whole thing is going to be to base moral philosophy on a purely a priori, non-empirical basis. It will have moral philosophy will have its empirical side, but it's going to be based on the rational. So laws of nature are laws according to which everything actually happens. Like I mentioned, the law of gravity. So it's concerned with what is and what is necessary. But the laws of freedom is what moral philosophy is studying, are laws according to which everything ought to happen or should happen in the full meaning of those words. So morality is about what one ought to do, what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, what is praiseworthy, what is reprehensible. So how do we determine what we ought to do? This is the big question of moral philosophy. So moral philosophy is the study of how everything concerning the human will ought to happen, not how it actually happens. Because as we see, and especially today, all you have to do is turn on the radio, right, or watch YouTube, and you can see a lot of unethical things being said and done. So when pure philosophy is formal, it's logic. When pure philosophy limits itself to an object of the understanding, it's metaphysics, like I was talking about space and time, and it's asking, how can there be something? How can we have experience? So physics has an empirical and a rational side. Ethics also has an empirical part, and he calls this practical anthropology. The word anthropoi in Greek means human, and then ology is from that infinitive legein, from which we get the word logos, ology, and so on. And one of its meanings is the study of. So anthropology is the study of humans. Now there's philosophical anthropology, which is a philosophical approach to human nature. In fact, we have a course here, there are courses all over the world in universities called Philosophy of Human Nature, or some schools call it, the more formal name for that is philosophical anthropology. And then we have anthropology as a social science, and then that is divided into so many different approaches like cultural anthropology and so on. But for Kant, practical anthropology is studying morality from the point of view of human nature. But that has to be based, I told you, on moral philosophy. And that's the rational part. Now, in this second section that I'm talking about now, the main question of morality starts to emerge for Kant. And let me just tell you in my own words how I see it happening. Kant assumes that there is morality in this world, okay? And basically he assumes that Christian morality is the only morality. He doesn't really say that, but that's what he thinks. You can see it by his discussion, especially if you read um, religion within the bounds of pure reason alone. It's all about the New Testament, Christian New Testament. So he assumes that there is morality, there is Christian morality. He doesn't say explicitly, I'm talking about Christian morality, but it is Christian morality when he talks about, you'll see as you start chapter 1, when he talks about the goodwill and everything, it's right out of the Bible. So there is morality in this world. But Kant's question is, what are the conditions for the possibility of morality? Okay? Basically, he's asking, how can this be? So he takes morality as a given. He doesn't try to prove that there is such a thing as morality. What he's looking for is the principles upon which morality is based. So we know that some people have a good will, and he's going to talk about that right off the bat in chapter 1. So what are the conditions for the possibility of the goodwill? See, and that movement is very unique to philosophy. All philosophers are questioning the conditions for the possibility of something. In this case, what are the conditions for the possibility of morality? Basically, it's asking why. In metaphysics, it's asking why is there something and not nothing? And what Kant is asking in this book is, why is there morality? How can there be morality? What are the principles upon which morality is based? So what are the a priori conditions for the possibility of Christian morality? Now, he wants, in section 3, he claims that the rational part, this a priori approach, is important, and it has to come first. Again, when he says first, he doesn't mean like first temporally. He means first ontologically. By ontology, that's just a fancy philosophical word. The word on in Greek, means being. So when we speak of ontology, or it's the study of being, and so when I use that word as a adjective, if I say the ontological conditions, what I mean is what comes first in terms of being. And he claims that the rational approach to morality must come first, ontologically. He complains in section 3 about mixing the empirical and the rational approach to ethics. He thinks that if you do that, and that's what everybody has done hitherto, he claims, then everything gets all jumbled up. In fact, all kinds of contaminants come in. Because if you base ethics on human nature, then you're basing it on somebody's view of human nature, somebody's experiences of human nature. So somebody may think, this way or that way about human nature, and so the principles of morality are going to be changed or altered and become relativized by the different approaches to human nature. So he thinks there really has to be a clear distinction between the empirical part of ethics and the rational approach. And the rational approach has to come first. He says it leads to confusion. It contaminates moral philosophy with the subjective experiences of the moral philosopher. So one person with a particular background of experiences will conclude one theory. Another person with another psychological background will conclude something else. I think what he's most worried about is the principles of morality will become relativized and bent. As soon as you start bending ethical rules, then you can always rationalize for lying, for example. If you just say lying is wrong and that's it, then you can't rationalize and say, well, I'm lying in this case because of this or that. And so he doesn't want to contaminate the moral principles. He wants them to be categorical, that is, universal, necessary, and valid in all cases, in all times. And not only for humans, but any rational creature. If there is any intelligent beings, beyond this. Did you know, I just heard this on the news. There's only like 13 miles from the Earth's surface, or a little bit under the Earth, to the atmosphere, and all of life is contained in those 13 miles. So, but if there's life beyond that that's rational, then it would have also to succumb to these laws. That's how universal, necessary, and categorical he wants the principles of ethics to be. Otherwise, you can always just bend the rules. As soon as you start bending rules, then anything goes, right? So he claims that the approach to ethics before him has contaminated ethics by trying to mix the empirical with the rational. So, in order to reveal universal and necessary moral obligations, these obligations cannot be based on human nature or on how the world actually is, but must be derived from a priori concepts of pure reason. And so that's going to be his approach. Now, we don't know what that is yet because we haven't gotten into the book, but he's just announcing that. And he's trying to give reasons why. He claims practical rules. Now, he's splitting hairs here, but practical rules may be based on experience. But moral laws is what he's looking for, must not. It must be based on pure practical reason. So if any action is to be morally good, it must not merely conform to moral laws derived from experience or from human nature, but it has to be done for the sake of moral laws, which are derived a priori. Now he's going to make a distinction later, acting, what he means by acting in accordance, like you may act in accordance with a moral law, but that it just so happened by coincidence that what you did happened to coincide with a moral law. But what Kant wants is for you to know the moral law and then act for the sake of the moral law, out of duty and respect for the moral law. Section 4, we don't have to make a big deal about Section 4. He just takes up this philosopher by the name of Wolff, W-O-L-F-F. And apparently, I've never studied Wolff, but apparently in Kant's time, Wolff's philosophy was famous, his moral philosophy, and he claims that it was based on rational principles. But he claims that it wasn't, and that it's based on psychology, based on human nature, and it wasn't his approach to the will, in general, and it's not based on purely a priori principles. And Kant is claiming that his approach to the will is completely based on a priori principles. So he wants the universal and necessary laws of freedom. In Section 5, he makes a distinction between different branches of ethics. There's the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, is what he's working on now and what we're going to look at. Then there's the critique of practical reason, which is the more philosophical. It's one of the three great critiques. The first critique, second critique. The second critique is the critique of practical reason. That one is very abstract and very difficult. And then there's the metaphysics of morals. And then, so he claims that the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals is a prelude to the metaphysics of morals. And this is important. This is probably the most important thing of the whole preface. What Kant is doing in this groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, he's taking a whole book with a preface and 3 chapters, and all 3 chapters are focused on revealing the supreme principle of morality, just this one principle. And he's going to call it the categorical imperative. And we're going to study that, how he derives it, and he's going to approach it in 3 different ways. We're going to see 2 of those 3 ways. So the task of the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, which is a prelude to the metaphysics of morals, is to generate the one pure principle of moral philosophy, that universal, necessary principle upon which ethical decisions can be made. And he claims that this will unify the theoretical and the practical side of morality. Excuse me. See, for Kant, that sneeze that I just made, that's my body doing it. So that was not a law of freedom. I could not sneeze right then. I mean, maybe I could if I really tried hard enough, but probably not. So that was the body doing that. But then in morality, it's not like sneezing, or it's not like the law of gravity. See, the law of gravity has no choice. It just has to follow the laws of nature. So we find our freedom by acting according to the laws of freedom. And we have a choice. Okay, so the last section, 6, he talks about the aims, the method, and the parts of the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. So the aim we've already talked about is to seek out and establish the supreme principle of morality. That's probably the best way of saying it, to seek out and to establish the supreme principle of morality. And we're going to see, we're getting ahead of ourselves now, but I just want to tell you so that you have that there, so you won't pass it by when you get to it. It's called the categorical imperative, and we're going to study that very carefully. And the method, he says, is going to be from analytic and then from the synthetic. What does he mean by that? The analytic method is to start with morality, like I said already. And basically it's Christian morality, but he doesn't say that. But I'm saying that now because Nietzsche is going, the next philosopher we're going to study is going to make a big point of the fact that morality in the West, ever since the Middle Ages, has been considered the only true morality is considered Christian morality. So that's going to be a big point with Nietzsche. So that's why I'm emphasizing it. But I think it's legitimate observation on Nietzsche's point. If you read Kant, it's Christian morality that he assumes. So there is morality, and it's Christian morality. And I told you he's going to now he's going to analytically break it down and find what are the conditions for the possibility of the Christian morality, which for him is based on the goodwill, having a good will. Okay, that's the analytic approach. The synthetic approach is going to be the other way around. He's going to start with the supreme principle of morality, and he's going to work up and show how this gives birth then to morality based on the goodwill. And it's going to have 3 chapters, he claims. And chapter 1 is going to be from common rational knowledge to philosophy. Chapter 2, from popular moral philosophy to a metaphysics of morals. And then chapter 3, a critique of pure practical reason. So we're not going to deal with chapter 3. So the big point there is the aim of the whole book. And it's unique because normally philosophers don't devote a whole book um, to one idea. But it's a key idea. Without this, there's nothing else. So he's looking for this. He wants to seek out and to establish the supreme principle of morality, that principle that makes possible Christian morality. And by the way, I had you buy this book, and of course you're not going to read the whole thing, but it's like the definitive study of Kant's groundwork. If you look to the actual text, though, it's very short. I mean, but the author, the editors and translators have analyzed it and didn't leave one um, stone unturned. But the actual text of Kant is only this big. So that's not as, the book is big and it has analysis of everything. So it's Oxford philosophical text. But if you can't get a hold of this one, get the actual text of Kant and read the preface in chapter 1 and 2. If you want to use another translation, that'd be fine. But if you're serious about Kant, this is the definitive, edition of Groundwork. Okay, so I'll make 2 more lectures, and I'll try to be less loquacious next time. I want to speak. I just want to give you the crux of each section so that you can go back and you won't lose the main points of each section. Okay, I'll see you part 2.